Hi everyone, I'm Holly, and this is the very first video on my new YouTube channel. This is very exciting and it's also a bit scary. I thought what I would do first of all for this very first video is just tell you a little bit about how I became a writer and then maybe show you where I do all my writing. First of all, I also need to introduce Star, who's decided she's going to come and sit on me for this video. She's probably going to disappear in the middle. Apologies for any running off cats in the middle of this video. So, whenever I come and do events at schools or libraries or festivals, people always ask me, have I always wanted to be a writer? And actually the answer is no, not at all. When I was growing up, I actually really wanted to be a librarian. And this is where usually all the librarians in the room start laughing, because I explained that I wanted to be a librarian because I thought that librarians just got to sit in the library and read all the books all day. And this is where the librarians look really sad and point out that no, this is not true. Actually, what librarians spend most of their time doing is ordering amazing books for people and talking to people about which books they want to read. And it's still a really, really great job and one I would actually love to do, but you don't get to do nearly as much reading as you want to. So when I was about 10 years old, I bought a book with a mistake on the back cover. It was a detective story and one of the main characters' names was spelt wrong. And I was so shocked and surprised that this could happen. And quite cross actually as well, and I wrote a letter to the publishers but they never wrote back. And this was the first time that I really discovered there were such people as editors. People whose job it was to be the person in between the writer and the finished book, the person who actually quite often gets to read the book first, which is really, really exciting. So, from the age of about 16, I went to work for a children's publisher. First of all, just doing work experience. I used to do a lot of photocopying. In fact, I hated the photocopier because it was always breaking and I was really bad at it. I used to read sometimes the unsolicited manuscripts, which are the stories that people send in asking if they can be published. Photocopying, running around, making coffee for people, doing odd jobs. And every time I finished doing this, I wrote them lots of lovely letters saying how much I'd enjoyed it and please could I come back. And eventually, after I finished university, I went and I worked full-time at the same publisher, which was called Scholastic Children's Books. And I started off as an editorial assistant. And I worked there for quite a long time. But I started as a proper writer because we were sitting round a huge table one day in our sort of boardroom working out ideas for a new book series. We had a book series mostly for girls that was just finishing, and we knew we wanted something to replace it. So we were talking about what ideally we would like to be publishing. And we were trying to think of ways that we could make readers feel that they were joining a really special group of people when they started reading a book. And I had an idea for a series of books about triplet sisters. So triplets are like twins, except there are three of them. And these triplet girls would be identical triplets, so they'd look really similar on the outside. But they would be really different in character, and they'd hate it actually when people kept mixing them up, except when they decided that they were going to do that, try to pretend to be each other on purpose. So, what I was actually supposed to do was go away and think up some ideas for these books, think up some storylines, think about the characters, and then talk to an author and say, look, we've had this really interesting idea, do you fancy going off and help and writing it for us? The problem was, I named the characters, and then I gave them pets. They had a lot of guinea pigs and a friend with a dog, and I realised that I didn't want somebody else to write this, I wanted to write it myself. But the problem was I'd never written a book before. I loved writing, I'd loved writing at school, and I'd written a few plays, pantomimes actually, for my guide unit to put on, but I'd never actually sat down and written a whole book. So it was a really scary decision to make, and looking back on it, I can't believe I actually did it. I can't believe I decided that I was going to try and do this when I had no experience really at all. But I did, and I, at the time, was living in Reading, quite close to where I still live now, and I was travelling into London every day on the train. Now, if you get the train from Reading to London, those trains are usually really, really full, so quite often I didn't have anywhere to sit on the train, and I would sit on the floor. So I wrote my first book sitting on the floors of trains between Reading and London Paddington usually in an exercise book like the kind you have at school. And when I'd finished it, I realised that I had a really big problem, because now I was going to have to tell everybody what I'd done. And in fact, I wasn't brave enough to do that. I typed it all up, printed it out, and I left it on the chair of somebody I worked with a note explaining, because I was too scared to explain properly, face to face, that I'd written this book. And that was this book, which, scarily enough, was published 16 years ago. It's quite weird that it's that long ago. I love this book so much. I particularly love the fact that the 3 girls on the cover are not 3 girls. They're one girl called Katie. We tried so hard to find actual triplets who could be the cover models, but they're very hard to find, surprisingly. So Katie, poor Katie, had to dress up in about 100 different outfits and have her hair done as 3 different girls to make her look like triplet sisters. And I have a huge affection for this book, even though I look back on it now and think I would have written it very differently if I were to write it again, but I really do love it. So that was my very first book, and then a couple of years after Triplets were published, I started writing animal stories. This is probably one of my most well-known books. It's called Lost in the Snow. And it's the first in my series of animal stories, which are about cats and dogs. I can't believe actually that this one was published in 2006, so that makes it 14 years ago that this series started, and I'm actually in the middle of writing book 47, I think. Yes, and this is book 45, which is the most recent one to have been published. It was actually published on World Book Day, so it's really appropriate that it's called The Story Puppy. And I particularly love this one because it's the story of a boy and a dog who meet each other just at the right time when they both really need someone to be there for them, and I really loved writing it. So my plan now is to show you a few of the different things that are in my writing room. It seems quite superior to call it a writing room. This is actually the end of our garage, where it used to be. When I stopped working as an editor and decided to write full-time, we realised that I needed somewhere that was actually going to be a permanent writing space. And as you can see, if we look around, it's sort of filling up. There's an awful lot of books in here. But as well as the books, all over the bookshelves are great for putting lots of extra things on. So I thought I would show you, oh look, Star's back. I thought I would show you some of the different things that are in my writing room, because some of them have lovely memories, and some of them actually have inspired books in themselves. So let's have a look. This is very exciting. This is Museum Kittens. This is my new series, which is going to be published next month. And it's up on a shelf because I just love the covers so much. And next to it, actually, is an illustration that isn't in the first book, but it is, it's the main characters from Museum Kittens. So this is Tasha, Peter, Bianca, and Boris. Sorry about the name. And they are the 4 Museum Kittens. This illustration is one of the samples that the amazing illustrator Sarah Lodge sent while I was in the middle of writing the first book. And it was just so great to get these illustrations of the cats, because that's done a huge amount for shaping the characters. One of the really exciting things was I was in the middle of writing a scene about Bianca and Tasha, the 2 girl kittens, where Bianca, the very superior looking white kitten who's always perfect, decides that her sister is so messy she's going to have to clean her fur up, and she starts licking Tasha's fur to tidy her up, and Tasha is absolutely infuriated about this. And Sarah sent a version of this illustration while I was writing it, so she hadn't seen it. She'd sort of worked out from the synopsis that this was going to happen, and it was as though we'd had this kind of amazing magical connection between us, and she'd known what I was writing about. It was so exciting. So it's always really lovely as a writer to start getting illustration samples and rough ideas for what your character is going to look like. It's incredibly exciting. So other things that I would really like to show you. Now husband, who is very kindly taking this video for me, says that this looks like a rat. This is not a rat, this is quite obviously a polar bear. And this is a polar bear that I've had since I was about 4, so scarily he's about 40 years old. This was my favourite toy, the toy that slept on stayed on my bed all through my childhood. I've always really loved polar bears, and he's actually one of the major inspirations behind this book, which is called The Snow Bear. So perhaps in a future video I'll explain a little bit more about my different winter stories and tell you some of the other inspirations behind them, but polar was a very important part of me deciding to write a polar bear book. This book is here because this is one of my absolute favourite book covers. This is the Japanese translation of a book called Emily Feather. And I just absolutely love this book, partly because I think it's so cool that it's the other way round to usual. So obviously we would read a book this way, like this. In Japan, they start from the back. And I just think that's amazing. And this book has really gorgeous illustrations. It makes it look like an extremely lovely kind of manga style book, and even though I can't read any Japanese at all, I love looking at it. Right way up. Okay. These are various different illustrations that readers have sent to me, and photographs. This cat was actually made by my Russian editor, and she gave it to me the first time I went to Moscow, which was really lovely. Lots of different illustrations and little things that readers have sent me, including this beautiful picture of a cat which I was given in Kaliningrad, which is another city in Russia. And you can see here that there is a rosette. This is, sometimes when I do book events, I like to have a craft, something that people can do, either a writing activity or something that people can make. And for this book, The Princess and the Suffragette, which is a sequel to one of my absolute favourite books called A Little Princess, we made suffragette rosettes. Now, I put votes for women in the middle of mine, but we had all sorts of amazing different slogans that people had written in the middle of their rosettes, thinking about girl power and important things that women need to be thinking about at the moment. So that's just a little bit of an introduction to where I write. I hope you've enjoyed it, and looking forward to making more videos for you soon. Bye!